Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is the Beyond the Game on Working with Athletes to Build Media Businesses panel. Hope you're all in the right place. I'm Mike Vorkanoff, your moderator. I'm going to do the quick intros now, just to get that out of the way. All right. I've got note cards to make sure I don't mess anything up. Sarah Flynn, CMO with 35V in Boardroom.
Glad to be here.
All right. Ray Chow, SVP with Vox Media. Matt Kramer, co-head of CA Sports Media Group.
Nice to be here.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's going to be a great panel. We're going to talk about Kelsey's and Manning's and KD's, and I'm just going to name drop without knowing anyone. But first, I'd like to start this with like a really, really tough question for all three of you. What is your favorite athlete-led podcast, YouTube series, media, whatever that you're consuming right now? Sarah, I'll start with you.
I have two, and the first is going to sound like it's cheating, but it is New Heights with the Kelsey brothers, which I enjoy because they don't get too deep into sports and they just have fun with each other. And the other is the relatively new podcast, A Touch More, with Megan Rapinoe and Sue Bird, which is in partnership with my friends at Vox Media.
I did not pay it.
Feel like you stole his answer a little bit.
This on? Oh, there we go. Okay. I didn't pay Sarah to say that. That's also one of my favorite shows to listen to now. I think I really enjoy any show that brings out the authenticity of the athlete, where they're relaxed, they're able to talk and connect with their guests or connect with their co-host and have a platform for themselves. So this morning I was watching Angel Reese's new show with Playmaker. We went to a live show for All the Smoke on Monday. There's a lot of great athletes out there current and former athletes who have found a platform where they're just sitting back and being themselves, and that, I think, brings out the best content.
All the Smoke does not get enough credit for paving the way for a lot of these athlete podcasts.
No, I agree with that completely. I think from my side, yes, they're CAA sports clients, but Jalen Brunson and Josh Hart's show, The Roommate Show, I think is a great show. And I think the word that we use in our building is exactly what you use, Ray, which is authenticity. It's just sitting there watching or listening to who you truly believe are two friends having a conversation. Doesn't matter that they play on the Knicks. The fact that they play on the Knicks is interesting to the audience in a certain way. But there was an episode a couple of weeks ago, maybe it was a couple of months ago, where they were interviewing Tom Thibodeau, their head coach. And, they're asking Tom Thibodeau what he does in the off season and, how big his summer home is. And these kind of questions that, you just don't think of players sitting there asking their head coach those kind of questions. And it was so relatable because I have a son who's 11, and he feels a connective tissue to Jalen and to Josh in a way that I don't think he would have if that show didn't exist. And I think it was really smart of those two guys to launch that show together. And it's become a favorite, certainly in our household.
So I'm not going to date myself, reveal my age, but when I was growing up and I wanted to know more about the Knicks, I'd listen to the radio, right? I grew up in New York, New Jersey. I'd listen to WFAN. And then after a while, maybe you'd go to transition to ESPN, MSG Network. Now, if you want to know about the Knicks, you listen to the Roommate Show. You listen to Jalen, you listen to Josh, talk about whatever it is they're talking about, and kind of bring you inside the locker room, so to speak. And they're not the only ones, right? So why do we see athletes flock into the media now, whether it's podcasts, whether it's production studios, whatever it is? Why are we seeing them, even while they're playing, building their own media businesses now?
I mean, first and foremost, I think it started with this kind of wave of athletes being like, listen, other people have been telling my story for my whole life. I need to be able to tell my story. And you started to see that with outlets like Players Tribune, uninterrupted to a certain degree. You started to see sort of this trend of athlete-first storytelling. And then eventually it goes from, okay, I'm telling my story, but I'm not benefiting from it financially. It was maybe great for marketing moment, but like other people are still actually like reaping the benefits of my story, even if it's in my voice. So what is the next step? How do I own my Like, how do I as a person own my own IP, which is something that actors and musicians and other celebrities have been doing for years and years and years, and athletes are finally starting to understand, I can do this in a way that makes sense for me and hopefully makes sense financially, which I know we'll get into in a bit.
I also think it's a different way to connect with your fan base. You're talking about your son, who's a Knicks fan, who, of course, is watching Jalen every game, but now he can connect and understand him as a person and engage with him in a different way. Of course, athletes have their social media handles. Of course, they're doing press conferences. Of course, they're doing interviews. But, podcasts are one of the few, and these digital shows are one of the few long-form opportunities for someone to tell their story in a way that isn't kind of chunked up into a soundbite, and they can connect with people and connect with an interview subject. And so it's just a way for you to build and engage your fan base.
I totally agree. I also think that some of the athletes look at this as an opportunity to enjoy doing media. I think that there was some there's always going to be some athletes who look at doing media as sort of a contentious back and forth. And to Sarah's point, they look at this as an opportunity to tell their story their way. And whether that's a trust factor or not, it's a reality of the situation, which is that if given the opportunity, these athletes have the time. They also have the sort of blessing now from teams, from leadership, which I don't think they had maybe 5-10 years ago. It's a normal thing for these athletes to be media personalities while also playing. And I think that they use this as an opportunity to just enjoy themselves and sort of get away from, going into the locker room and having one-on-one interviews with the press. They say to themselves, I'll do that. I have that responsibility. But at the same time, I want to talk about the things I want to talk about with my friends, who also happen to be my teammates or my coaches or my friends, whatever. And they use those opportunities to enjoy themselves that way.
Well, let me follow up. So you mentioned All the Smoke, right? They were a forerunner in this space. In all three of you are coming from different perspectives in a way to this. As you're talking to athletes who are interested in getting into the media business, who are interested in building something, or you're thinking about building in something, starting something yourself, where and who do you look at as kind of the disruptors or the models of what you want to do or what you want to help them do as they're thinking about doing this? Or if you're on the business side, about working with an athlete to do something in media?
The first thing I always say is this is going to take more time and be more work and less money than you think, at least in the first year. We talk about podcasting, but anything in the digital media space is a bet on yourself endeavor. You are taking a risk. You are investing a ton of time. It's not just 1 hour a week. People think they're just sitting down with their friend and they get to chit chat and they're like, well, it's like we're hanging out, having a drink. We just record it and put it online. It's a lot more work to prep and to make a good show that actually resonates with audiences. And so the first, that initial launch, let's call it, is a bet on yourself endeavor with enormous upside potential because of a lot of the things that Sarah's talking about with ownership. You can own your own show. You can own the IP. It can be a thing. You can build a franchise that has a lot of value that you can take. And once you have a big audience, you can generate a lot of value through different ways, whether that's advertising or subscriptions or events or commerce or whatever it is. And so, what I always tell people is you have to be passionate enough to actually sit down every week and really do this week in, week out. And you need to be ready to make like 100 or 1,000 episodes of the show. And you have to be excited about that prospect.
It's funny to go back to my son, who's 11. He doesn't know John Madden as a football coach. He knows John Madden as either a video game or a television personality. And that's what we're talking to our current athletes about. And we're saying, hey, you may win 5 championships. You may win 10 championships. That's what we want you to do that. But 20 years from now, 30 years from now, a whole group of young consumers may not remember you as the athlete. So what do you want them to remember you by if it's not just your on-field achievements? And so that's where we've seen people say, okay, that's where we want to get into the media world. That's where we want to get into some of the post-career stuff at a much earlier age. And it just so happens that media seems to be the first thing I think our talent is transitioning into while currently playing. Not everybody can be a video game, but we say to those guys, same thing, men and women, 20 years from now, how do you want those 10, 15, 20-year-olds to, how do you want them to know you by? What do you want them to know you by? And it will likely be something other than the athlete that they played on the field.
It's that interesting mix between what are your financial expectations and what do you want to be doing with your time. I think for both short-term and long-term, like, you have to really sit down with someone. You really have to say, okay, listen, like, what are your expectations here? And, like, how much time are you willing to devote to it? Because if you are talking about building something in media and you don't want to be the face of that thing every single week for an indefinite period of time, you're going to get 8 weeks
Never
in.
ends.
You're like, I come from the talent management space. We all work with talent on a very regular basis. Like, you, even as you're building your own media company and even as you're sort of looking at broader goals, you always have to think from a talent first perspective. And, like, is the person sitting next to you saying they want to do this? Are they going to call you in 4 weeks and go, hey, how long do I have to do this for? Whether it's being on a podcast or hosting a video show or appearing on broadcast, like, sometimes it's about, okay, maybe you want to do more passive investing and take more sort of high risk, high reward opportunities where you don't have to be the face of the thing. You can just invest like a normal person at the scale of the finances that you have. So it's about having, like, real and hard conversations, and not doing the thing that I think is, like, the instinct that everyone has, which is make this sound easier than it is to get you on board and then flow with it and then we'll make it work together, which doesn't work.
Part of what attracts people, and going back to the media side, it's not just the legacy, which is a big part of it, but a lot of these athletes are seeing the enormous upside that you can accomplish in the podcast space. Obviously, let's talk about the Kelceys for a second. If you think about how much money they're going to make through their podcast, it's unbelievable to think that a show that was launched 2 years ago is going to pay Travis a relatively similar, and again, who knows exactly how the money is flowing, but it is in the same ballpark of what he's making from football this year, what he's making from his podcast, and that upside is unbelievable. And not everyone's going to accomplish.
If that is your expectation, you are wrong.
That's not going to happen for everyone, but the fact that you can build a show that you own and is a show that you're comfortable and you get to talk to your brother week in, week out and make a show where you own the creative, strategy and editorial approach of the show, like, that's incredibly rewarding and satisfying.
I also think, to the Kelce's point, and Jason in particular, is proof that you used to sort of have to be the Dallas Cowboys quarterback or the New York Giants quarterback to immediately get a job at one of the premium television networks as the lead game analyst. Now you see talent, and this is not to say that they aren't famous in their own right, but Jason Kelce, Pat McAfee, Dan Orlovsky, really, really talented, really, really successful sports media personalities who are centers and punters and third-string quarterbacks. The audience knows what the audience likes, and they can see through whether or not the person is providing interesting content or not. And yes, being a star and providing great content is amazing, but you don't have to be the biggest star on the field to also, it doesn't mean you're going to transition to a great personality. You can be someone who's not necessarily the starting quarterback of a team and have a really, really successful media career.
It is interesting. You juxtapose Tom Brady, very famous, 10 out of 10 on the famous scale, and Jason Kelce, very good player, obviously, but center, not a very noteworthy position when it comes to things. They're both making a lot of money in this, right? And it shows how the sheer will and force of your personality can get you to a lot of places now by starting your own media business. And how do you guys, when you talk about starting, whether it be a podcast, whether it be whatever it may be, how do you try to set expectations for everyone? Not only, Sarah, to your point about, hey, this may go on a while. If we do well, like, your biggest problem is that you're going to keep doing it. But how do you set expectations for them about what this could all look like, what the median outcome is, that it's not going to all end up as Kelsey's and Peyton Manning's and whatever. Matt, if you want to start, we'll go counterclockwise.
I mean, look, we say this in all of our meetings. Honesty is the best policy when we talk to our clients. We're very transparent with them that it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of work. There are examples of tremendous success in this business, and there are examples of tremendous failure. And the failures are primarily upon people who have outsized expectations. And the other issue that we talk to our talent about as they transition into sort of post-career work is athletes are used to a very objective lifestyle. They are, a Jason Kelsey as a center is significantly better than another center, and that's sort of everyone can acknowledge that. But as media personalities, Amazon could think he's worth this, and ESPN could think he's worth that, and NBC could think he's worth this. And it's very subjective, and it's very difficult, I think, for athletes to understand that as they go into their post-career lives. And we want to level set those expectations to our talent early on. Hey, first you have to be tremendously passionate about it. You have to put together the right team around you. You have to put together a team that understands realistic expectations. And you have to understand that it's going to take time. Not everything is going to be a $25, $30, $40, $50 million success in year one. It can be, but it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of work to get that to that level. Now, many of the athletes are used to putting in a lot of work. So they're used to saying, hey, I've been working hard since I was 5 years old. So rarely do we find work ethic problems. It's just a matter of if they're passionate enough to do it.
Just to jump off the passion point, if you think about going back to the bet on yourself idea, you have to be passionate. You have to build a thing, a platform, a show, a franchise that you're passionate about, that you're going to do it regardless almost of what the paycheck is. Not to bring up the Kelseys again, but their first year deal, they did not do that deal for the money. Of course, they're making a ton of money through football, through endorsements, through other things. They were passionate about building a show, and that they built a show that was authentically themselves. When we work with people like Megan Rapinoe and Sue Bird, this isn't a situation where we have a 2 to 3 o'clock programming slot on a TV channel and we're saying, hey, talk about these 5 topics because that's what the audience wants. And we're going to tell you exactly what to say week in, week out, and that's going to make a successful show. They have to really tap into the topics that they're passionate about, that they want to talk about, and they show up as their authentic selves, and that's what their audience is ultimately looking for, and that's what the audience connects with. And so, we encourage athletes to build a show that taps into those passions. It doesn't just have to be about soccer and basketball. You should talk about the WNBA if you're a WNBA star, but if you guys care about politics because the election's coming up in a few weeks and that's the thing that's on your mind and that's the thing that you're authentically thinking about and passionate about, and you have a lot of thoughts and feelings and opinions that you want to get out there and express, this is the right platform for that, because that's how you're going to authentically express yourself. And, outside of the broadcast media space where you're a talking head on a program and everyone's talking about the same topics, a podcast or a digital show or whatever is showing up in a digital environment where you're building your own program, you have to really tap into what you're passionate about.
The thing that I think that has been hardest in sort of working with athletes in this space, and I think it's true of anybody, is understanding and wrapping your head around the idea that the thing that you're working on doesn't come with like a set paycheck, so to speak. You know what you're making on the field, you know what you're making on the court, you sign a brand deal, it's X hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, you know what those expectations are. You go to work every day, you have a salaried job, you know what that looks like. Like, there's all of these sort of set expectations of what work looks like and what's like demanded of you. And if you're starting a business of any kind, you have none of that. You have a P&L, you have a team around you, and you have to bet on the team around you to make sure that P&L actually makes sense. I think for us, it was a little bit different than thinking about sort of, okay, what goes into starting a podcast? Because when we built Boardroom, we were building a whole media brand, and we were betting on this idea that sports fans care about the sports business as much as sports business executive nerds like us do. And I think we've proven that to be true. But, Kevin was is equally excited and, as to you guys' point, passionate about the idea and about building this, but he also knew that his business partner, Rich Kleiman, and I had known him for a really long time. He knows the way we work. We all have constant conversations about things. We had that familiarity level from day one to say, okay, this sounds cheesy, but we literally bet on each other, and we're like, let's start this thing and build this thing. And also, by the way, Kevin, we're building this business that is part of your legacy and is something that you get to be this huge part of and have this huge creative involvement in, but you don't have to run it day to day. You don't have to show up every single week because you're doing all of these other things, and you can be the force behind it, but not the face of it. And I think that that's something that, when you're talking to any athlete, you have to figure out what their appetite for those things are, because sometimes they really want to be on TV and sometimes they really want to be building a business behind the scenes.
How do you figure out when to take your media company, take your podcast, and extrapolate it into a larger business? As you said, it's beyond just Kevin doing his own podcast, right? You guys have a website, you have a digital product, you have 35 Inning Boardroom has grown, you have events now, you have all of these things. How do you figure out when that moment comes and how you should approach it?
I mean, we started out with this sort of scope that we have now in our heads. We started out with sort of the website. We started out testing things on social, doing athlete and executive interviews on social and just seeing what worked. Kevin did have a podcast for a span of time. Rich had a podcast for a span of time. That came honestly kind of in the middle when we were figuring out our voice and figuring out who we were and also figuring out what that space looked like. And I think at the time we knew that those properties were things that were going to be finite for us because they weren't going to be things those guys are necessarily going to come and do every day. And we've kind of evolved what that looks like and evolved sort of their voices and how they work with, you'll see Kevin in some of our content, you'll see Rich doing interviews in some of our content, but we keep evolving what those products are and what they feel like based on audience response, which I think is really huge. You have to actually understand what people are saying and as it's growing, who are the new people coming in and where is that appetite and how are you going to grow it? You got to have somebody on the audience development side sort of telling you what that growth path looks like for you. You obviously have to sort of know from a brand standpoint where those revenue sources are coming from and where people are responding. For us, our experiential business has grown 3x in the last year and a half because people kept coming to our events and being like, that was honestly one of the best experiences I've ever had. So you have to listen to sort of what those responses are and also, again, follow the stuff that you've got the appetite to do.
The way we see it is, a podcast or a digital or modern talk show is the perfect foundation for a content business. You can build a big audience. It allows you to channel your voice and start to build a content flywheel that exists not just in audio platforms but on video platforms, on social, and also shows up at live events. Not to call out Megan and Sue again, but they're showing up with their talk show at Cannes, at WNBA All-Star, at NWSL Championships, at Final Four, and there's a huge opportunity for them to create this rich ecosystem with the show as the real foundation. And we've seen a lot of that within our portfolio outside of the sports space, for example, with Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway and the Pivot podcast. That really started out as just a audio show, but over the last 6 years of building that business with them, building an audience, finding brand partners, showing up in a live and experiential capacity, expanding into video and social, and ultimately extending into a lot of different platforms. We see the podcast as a great, malleable foundation for all of that activity.
Matt?
Yeah, I think when we talk to our talent about launching shows or launching networks, in chapter 2, so to speak, we talk about the type of shows that would have some form of connective tissue to their original sort of core show and core audience. If you start going too fast by launching other shows under an umbrella that really have nothing to do, at least with the same audience that we think our clients connect with, it doesn't necessarily work for us, or it doesn't necessarily work for our talent. So every time we talk to our talent about, okay, we're ready to launch a second show, or these guys want to launch another show, we wanted to make sure it feels authentic to not just them, but also the audience that listens to them, because by virtue of that, it would be naturally more accustomed to feeling comfortable going to that show and thinking it's sort of tried and trusted from that crew.
And I've been wondering, obviously, all these professional athletes now make a good amount of money, right? And as they're figuring out how to spend their time, where to take their interests, as you said, Sarah, they could just make money passively. How important is it for them to get a piece of the company that they're starting? Like Matt, starting with you, when you're negotiating these deals, how important is it that they get equity in whatever it is, whether it's the roommate show, whether it's whatever they might be doing to start their media business?
I think equity is really important. I think, naturally, many of these athletes, the large majority of these athletes, are incredibly lucky, and they recognize that for how much they make on the playing field or on the courts. I think the equity opportunity for these clients incentivizes them to really continue to stay invested in the success of it. I think if you look at the traditional sort of standalone marketing deals from back in the day, hey, we'll give you $500,000, you'll do a commercial for this product, and you'll never think about that product again. That worked for a certain generation of athletes. I think this generation of athletes, and congratulations and to a lot of our player agents and obviously to the players associations who have negotiated enormous collective bargaining agreements that have afforded these players the opportunities to make life-changing money. The opportunity for these guys to build Chapter 2.0 for them, certainly equity is a major part of it because they want to stay invested in it too. And they believe that the upside is potentially tremendous, and I think it's really important when we have these conversations about that.
I think it's so personal. I mean, we're talking about a talk show or a content business or a media company that's built around the athlete, and they spent their whole lives playing for a different team or playing for a league where they don't hold equity, or they're doing an endorsement deal with Nike or Adidas or whoever, whatever company, and can be a very transactional thing. And a show is so personal, and it's so deeply rooted in their passions and their authentic selves, and so it is really important for them to feel like they have a real stake in the upside of the show, and that it's a reflection of them as people, their whole selves. And it's not just that they're like hired to be a talking head on a daytime talk show.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of the kinds of things that we're talking about, you can't do the thing without them. You can't have a Touch More without Megan and Sue. You can't have the Roommates podcast without those. Like, it just goes away if you don't have them. So if they don't have some kind of equity in the thing that you're building, like it's very, very different to you're selling sandwiches, so I'm paying you a fee because I'm just going to put your face on this Subway poster. Like, it's just a very, very different thing. And I think to Ray's point, it is very personal. Like, you're selling to some extent their personality, their life story, like the anecdote that they told that one time that you turned into a social clip that was sponsored by Postmates, and Postmates got 5 million impressions out of that one clip. And now their value for the thing that they bought is so much. Like, that's your conversation. That's you that you're selling. So you have to own a part of it, or it doesn't make sense.
Ray, when you're figuring out whether to start a show and who to do a show with, how do you try to identify your host? Who are you looking for? Is it star power? Is it market where they play or used to play? Social media following? Like, what are you looking at in terms of making that decision?
Yeah, there's a few things. One is, and this is true both in sports and outside of sports, we're looking for hosts who are best in class, right? They're an expert, or they are top within their field. And that's an important thing, whether you're starting a business show or a news show or a politics show or a sports show. That's one. Two is, the passion, the personal passion that they are really committed to actually building this thing. And it's going to be a lot of work. It's probably going to be harder work than people realize when they're starting a new show. And three, that they are really committed to it for the long term, that this isn't a thing that's like a one and done. I'm going to do 2 social posts and I'm going to show up in the studio and record something. This is a long-term endeavor, and we're going to build a business that hopefully will be around, not just around, but will be vibrant and exciting and a big part of your life for a long, long time. And the fourth thing is really finding people who have a voice that is distinct and differentiated, that adds something to the conversation, right? There's, women in sports, and women's sports is a huge part of the sports narrative this year. And I can think of no better athlete or commentator or voice than Megan Rapinoe and Sue Bird to be the guide and the analyst and the commentator and the storyteller through that whole narrative. And so we think a lot about, of the hosts that we're talking to, why them and why now and why is this show going to break through? Because it is a really crowded ecosystem of content. It's a really fragmented landscape of shows and YouTube channels and social handles. And how do you break through? And the answer always comes down to this person and this show is really distinct. And this is a unique voice that adds something that no one else can bring to the table.
So I'm going to follow up on that, but we have about 15 minutes left. We're the only thing between you guys and happy hour. I do want to know, does anyone have any questions in case we want to do Q&A later? If you do, just raise a hand. Quick survey. All right, great. We'll get to drinks. We talked a lot about successful businesses, media business, great podcasts. We've all shouted someone out. What's a reason to say no from all sides of it? When is the time to say, this is not for me?
I mean, I can answer that. I think you brought up a really interesting point, Ray, earlier, which is building of a business, right? So we say no a lot of times on behalf of our clients when we feel like the buyer, so to speak, is truly in this for the transactional purpose of it all. Hey, we want, this person is really successful. This person is hot. We think this is going to be a great show. We're going to give you a lot of money. And we don't really have any plan other than just we want to be able to send out a press release saying we announced a new show. And we've seen it a lot, right? We've seen a number of media companies sort of not really formulate any sort of business plan for what it's going to look like after 6 months or 12 months or in success. And, you know, we caution our clients on this all the time, which is, look, if we were just in the transactional business, everyone would just try to make as much money as humanly possible, as fast as possible, and we'd all be out of business. But what Ray is talking about and what these guys are doing, obviously, is we're working with them on trying to build sustainable long-term businesses. And the early no's from us are usually people who are coming to our clients really aggressive with no actual business plan. And we've got to be watching for that.
It is, I think, remarkably easy to tell who just wants a paycheck or who just wants a press release. And you got to go with your gut in that
What's the tell?
I mean, and again, we've all been doing this for a long time, so like maybe it's not that easy on paper, but it is that thing where like you realize really quickly, I think, in talking to somebody that they don't have a plan beyond X date.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's on the brand side, that's on the partner side, that's on the athlete side. Like they literally are focused on the, okay, how do we get started? What does week 1 look like? What does week 2 look like? And they're not talking about, well, what does success look like in a year or 3 years?
Or they're not paying attention to the details, right? I was hearing earlier, gossiping, doing industry gossip earlier this week, hearing about a show where, you know, great talent, and, you know, the company I think they were excited about the press release, but they were also just hadn't actually thought through the logistics of like, how are we actually going to activate around talent and how hard that is and how much work it takes. And it's not just you hire a freelance producer and they're going to show up and we'll send some cameras and some microphones. It is really hard and complicated, and everyone needs to be committed. The media company needs to be committed. The talent needs to be committed. The talent's managers and their whole team needs to be committed, and everyone needs to be really focused and be willing and ready to work through the details. And anytime you're just really fixated on the press release, on the social post, on the whatever, you know, it's not going to create a product that has any longevity beyond the first episode.
What does it take to launch something off the ground? Like, what is it important that you have in place, aside from the hosts, obviously, that like, hey, we're doing this, we're actually ready to succeed, not just ready to, as you say, win the press release?
Yeah, I think a lot about, you know, when we sign on new talent, we spend a lot of time thinking about their show and how is that show going to be structured? Because I think the way I see it is all the talent that we're talking about, they have big names, they're famous, they have a ton of social followers. That's going to help bring the listener to check out the show. But what's going to keep the listener listening or watching the show for the whole episode and then to tune in next week or the next day to the next episode? And if you don't have a show that's thought through, that's well structured, that's well edited, that has a real thesis around how we're going to flow from the intro all the way to the credits, then we're not going to keep an audience around. And so we spend a ton of time with, editors and producers, and it's not just the logistics of cutting tape and what music we're going to add, but it's like, actually, what are the things that what are we going to talk about on the show? What are we going to talk about in episode 20? What are we going to talk about in episode 100? And what are the different beats of the show, and why are listeners going to tune in every single week to listen to it? I think the Kelseys have done an incredible job of that. Of course, there's an influx of interest because they're both in the Super Bowl. There's an influx of interest because he's dating someone. But people are tuning in not just because they're interested in hearing that one snippet, but they're sticking around. It's because they've built a really great show.
And we look at that too. We look at, from the talent side, we look at the production companies and we look at the media companies who do a really good job of week in, week out social media, week in, week out production. You have to remember how few people, I assume, you would have the data, we don't, actually sit there and consume the entire show every single week, right? Most of the times people listen or watch New Heights, they may have seen it because they saw a good clip on social media. They saw something that they thought was funny on TikTok, and it led them to go listen to the show. Same thing with the Roommate show. So you look at those companies who are doing that really well, and you say, I want to partner with those. I want our talent partnering with those kind of companies. Because you're naive to think you represent big talent, and just everyone's going to listen every Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock on their Metro North End because they're so famous. You have to have all those other components, and that's where the Voxes do really well. That's where the boardroom people do really well. That kind of stuff really matters when we're looking at where we want to place our talent who want to do shows like this.
I think whenever anybody has an idea, be it internal at a company, be it coming from an athlete or a talent side, be it a brand that's coming to you with a paycheck and they're like, we really want to do something like XYZ, the first question you have to ask is who's going to make it? And that's, okay, so if it's an active athlete you're talking to, who has their travel schedule and who's with them on the ground, because it's probably not going to just be them doing the thing and showing up for the thing every single time.
What day of the week are they going to record?
Exactly.
How does it fit into practice?
Exactly. If they're going remote, what does the set look like so it doesn't look like shit if it's on video? And then internally, it's like, okay, on the partner side, if you're at Vox or if you're working with a different media partner or if you're at Boardroom, okay, what does the production team's schedule look like, and who on the production team is going to do this? Are we hiring additional resources, or are we hiring outside to get this done? And who are the right people in place to actually make this thing week after week and not just think about making what week one looks like and worrying about it later, because that's not going to scale. And then who's the team who's going to say, okay, here's what we're seeing, here's what the data looks like, here's what I think we can do with that data to make it better. And then who's going to tell the people that are making the content on the athlete side and on the production team, who are also creatives and they have lots of opinions, how to get the things done and make it better? And like, what does that entire workflow look like for at least year one? It's shocking how few people think about this.
No, it's really important, especially when you're representing talent, right?
Yeah.
The last thing you want is, shitty production. Okay, that's just.
I mean,
that's
listen,
it.
I'm sure we've both been in situations where we've been talking to a brand and they've tried to sign an athlete. You find out they haven't even factored in the budget for the production day.
Of course.
Are you telling me Jalen Brunson doesn't travel the country with a Yeti microphone and like
Actually might.
ring light?
Probably does now. I don't know.
Okay, I'll need answers on that one. I'm going to ask a bit of a self-serving question. I work at The Athletic, owned by the Times. Legacy media has been, under duress for a while. We always hear about our troubled future. Who's going to replace me, AI or AI?
Is this an AI panel? No.
Like more seriously, what does this mean for the relationship, the role of how athletes will supplant what media has been doing up to this point, and including now? Because
I'll actually jump in on this. So it was interesting. I think what the larger media companies, particularly on the sports side, are understanding is they want to serve the entire sports audience. So take a look at Monday Night Football. ESPN's done a really, really good job of basically saying, okay, we're going to serve a subset of fans who want Manning cast, which the ratings come out are 1 million people, 2 million people who want to watch Peyton Manning watch the game. and have him interact with Bill Belichick or interesting people. And then there's still 20 million people who actually just want to sit there and watch the game, and they want to watch the most highly produced, best game with Joe Buck and Troy Aikman and Laura Rutledge and Lisa Salters. And I think that I don't believe that the sports journalist or the sports commentator will just be replaced by the athlete. I think the athlete who is excellent at media production or excellent at creating media companies will end up being another, I don't want to call it another channel because that's too easy to say, but another option. And I think that's really important for people to understand. It's about optionality now, and that's what's really important.
I was going to say it's a yes and. I agree 100% with everything you said. And it's also just different, right? It doesn't replace the commentators during the game, the pregame show, the postgame show. It's the thing that comes out on Tuesday or on Wednesday that offers something really, really different and distinct from what you're getting specific around the game. You're getting an interview. You're getting the unfiltered thoughts of that athlete. You're getting actually the athlete talking about stuff other than sports, other things that they're passionate about. And it's a whole different way of connecting with someone with talent, with someone that you're a huge fan of. And it's just a different product. And it's not necessarily, to me, replacing sports media or replacing a different thing, a piece of journalism. It's an additional editorial product that certainly we see an enormous amount of audience demand for.
I think the answer to that question also, you have to zoom out and think about who's going to win the streaming wars. I have a music industry background. There was a time when I was on marketing calls with Napster, RDO, MTV, who had their own music store, Hot Topic, who had their own music store, Walmart, who had their own music store, Verizon, who had their own music store. Like, we've seen all of this in various industries come to a head. That's now happening IRL with all of the film and TV streaming services, and eventually they're going to eat each other, and eventually there's going to be some key winners. And I think that's really going to dictate a little, like, quality is 100% going to rise to the top in a lot of situations. I think we all believe that from a talent standpoint. But at the same time, there's a TV show on Paramount Plus right now that's in its second season starring Nicole Kidman and Morgan Freeman. And I learned about it this morning because I saw an ad in the subway. Like, that's wild. So there is the kind of that magic combination of market share, marketability, and quality that has to all work together. And I don't think legacy media is going away, so to speak, but I also think that both new media and legacy media have some things to figure out in terms of what sort of all these new opportunities look like, because they can't all exist like they are.
All right, we have about 2.5 minutes left, so I'll ask one last question, and this is forward-looking. What does the future of all this look like in 5 years, 10 years? Like, obviously, it's hard to pinpoint what it'll look like in a year, as you said. There's so many factors that weigh in, but if you guys have to give predictions, what do you think this looks like in the future? And Sarah, if you want to start off.
This is a bold one, but I'm willing to do it. I think print media is going to come back. I think that I was having this conversation with somebody yesterday, like, there is a generation of kids right now who haven't held product in their hands in the same way. Vinyl sales are currently going up. It's teeny tiny numbers, but people are buying cassettes again. And again, like, I look to music often to be a front runner in some of those kinds of things. You're starting to see a couple of sort of niche zine-like publications come out. People really kind of enjoy that. And I think there's an entire generation of people who never got to consume that kind of media, and they're going to be really excited about it again.
I'm going to not do 5-10 years because that's too far out, and who knows. Media is going to certainly change a lot in a lot of ways we can't predict. But, I like the framing you use with chapter 1, chapter 2, and that makes a lot of sense. You're Tom Brady, chapter 1, you just finished your chapter 1, you're starting your chapter 2, that makes sense. To me, the thing that we're starting to see the shift is the blending of those two things happening at the same time, right? We've been getting pitches from star college athletes who, and I would say maybe a more legacy media perspective is like, well, why would anyone want to listen to this college athlete who hasn't accomplished anything yet? They haven't signed their deal. They're not in the NFL yet. They're not in the NBA yet. But my counter to that is they have a huge and engaged fan base. They have hundreds of thousands, millions of followers on Instagram. They have the real potential to build a really thriving content business in parallel with their sports career. Most people can't handle both of those things at once. That's a lot to juggle, and There's a huge time commitment for both, obviously, but we're going to see more and more athletes and talent, I think, build those two careers in parallel. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity for sports media in general.
I agree. I think we're going to see more and more optionality when it comes to viewing live events. And I think you'll see this generation of younger kids wanting to consume games, sort of watching those games virtually with their friends, whether that be through Twitch, whether that be through YouTube, whether that be through whomever wins those wars. But at the end of the day, I think this concept that we maybe grew up in where you would go to a bar to watch a soccer game with your friends, I think people will go less to the bar to watch with their friends, and they'll watch with their friends, but they'll all watch on their laptops, on their iPhones, on their iPads together. And whoever sort of wins that environment, I think will be the big winner.
That's really interesting. I'm going to find all you guys 3 years. We'll see who's right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for attending, for listening. Sarah, Ray, Matt, thank you for doing this. Go ahead, grab a drink.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.